Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show presented by the Fantasy Football Players Championship exclusively on the Better Sports Network. Hello, hi, and how are you, everybody? I'm Eric Balkman. You know me from the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, the FFPC, and the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. You can connect with me on X at Eric Balkman. So glad to have you aboard tonight as we are wrapping up draft season. The NFL will be here 1 week from today. It's going to be so much fun to see the Ravens and Chiefs kick things off in Kansas City. Tonight, we do have a great show for you, a couple of great guest co-hosts that I'll bring on shortly. Before we do that, I want to remind everybody the Fantasy Pros Championship is indeed live. You can check it out at myffpc.com. We have drafts going off every hour, basically on the hour. So if you want to take your shot at $1 million grand prize at a $350 entry fee, do that now, myffpc.com. These are some of the fastest filling drafts we have. I think we had 2,000 plus register for drafts with the FFPC yesterday. So when you register with us, you won't be waiting long. MyFFPC.com is where to go. Click on Fantasy Pros Championship, or you can just scan that QR code that our wonderful producer, Matt Deutsch, has put up on the screen as well, and that will take you right to it. Speaking of things that are wonderful, my guest co-host tonight, you follow him on the X over at Shauf DS. It is the incomparable Matt Shauf. And Matt, I think the biggest thing I have that the biggest letdown I have is I have nothing IDP on the rundown for you tonight.
It doesn't matter. You just introed me better than if my wife was hosting the show. So I have no complaints.
The host of the award-winning Draft Sharks podcast, and of course, a two-time IDP accuracy champ on Fantasy Pros. He has already got a main event league in the FFPC. That championship is under his belt as well. Shauf DS on the X is where to follow him. We have a ton to get to tonight. In fact, Matt and I are going to take a spin around the NFL, including our take on the latest breaking news that we have about Brandon Aiyuk out of San Francisco. We'll also find out some of the SuperFlex League tips that Matt put together for Draft Sharks. So before you're drafting your SuperFlex League this weekend, or maybe the SuperFlex Best Ball Tournament with the FFPC, he's got some friendly tips to know there as well. Every year for the Fantasy Pros Draft-a-thon that we put on at the FFPC, we always pick a different charity where we donate $50 for every draft filled to that charity. This year, it's a really, really cool one, actually. Our very own Chris Lambert, if you play in the FFPC, you probably know her. She has helped and assisted so many people over the years, going back 15 years now with the FFPC. She is a wonderful, fantastic customer service person. And she has a very interesting, I want to say side gig because she doesn't get paid for it. But she does something on the weekends that has taken up a lot of her time, a lot of her energy, and it's very near and dear to her. We have a special package we want to roll to introduce this year's charity for the Fantasy Pros Championship. And if you're not aware of Chris Lambert, maybe a little bit of an introduction into her. Matt, you can roll that video here.
In 2005, we selected him as a wounded warrior to come out as our guest to have a good time with passionate fantasy football players. He arrived in a wheelchair 11 months after he was critically injured in Iraq. I stayed in touch with him. He would reach out to me, update me on what was going on in his life, some of the trials and tribulations of his injuries. He lost his legs. He had a brain injury, but he kept forging on in his life. He joined the Paralympics. He really, really tried to continue on with his life, to serve his country, to be a good person. He had a rescue dog, which was a service dog for him. I lost touch with him around 2013. And then I Googled to see what he was up to, maybe with the Paralympics, and I realized that he had killed himself. And so that really impacted me for a person that I only met in person for just a couple days of my life. I knew I needed to carry on his memory, his dedication to just being a helpful person, and rescue dogs is what I wanted to do. I started a 501c3 and I named it Case to the Rescue after him. There's a couple coordinators and rescue people on the ground in Lexington that go to the shelters and pick up the dogs daily as they're being euthanized, hang on to them to the next time that I can get down there in my shuttle. I think that my record number on my shuttle was 92, which included litters of puppies, big dogs, little dogs, and and a couple of cats. The best way that anybody in this fantasy football community can help is to play this weekend in the Fantasy Pros Championship. I'm so honored to be selected as the charity this year. The impact is humongous. It will be saving thousands of dogs.
The Draftathon weekend for the FFPC officially kicks off at 12:30 a.m. this evening. $50 for every draft will be donated to Casey to the Rescue, Chris Lambert's chosen charity, something that she works very hard at, driving from New York to Kentucky. Saved thousands of dogs last year, literally days, sometimes hours before they're scheduled to be euthanized. And if you want to help support that and save more dogs, definitely $50 to every charity, or to $50 for every draft will go to Casey to the Rescue, starting at 12:30 a.m. tonight, all the way through Monday evening's drafts. Just go to myffpc.com, click on the Fantasy Pros Championship, and that'll bring up all the drafts that are going on. Anything labeled as Draftathon is one that you can sign up for, and you can help support the cause. We're hoping to raise a lot of money this year and save a lot of dogs' lives. And Matt, and I know Chris is near and dear to you as well. You've worked with her over the years. You don't live too far from her as well.
That's true. Yeah, we've worked together a lot. Chris is an amazing person. I know that I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know about her. She's such a hard worker for FFPC stuff and obviously for the dog rescue. I've never not been impressed with her level of dedication and how much work she's willing to put into things like this that she cares about. So it's amazing to see that. I'm glad that her charity is getting this, level of support and publication, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can tell you too, the FFPC was sort of like this young upstart in 2008. And nobody knew it was going to happen. But once Chris came aboard, I could tell you that things really took off, and the FFPC would not be able to offer all these contests and these huge, multiple $1 million grand prize contests without her. She works so hard, and hopefully we can help out her and those dogs this weekend. Once again, myffpc.com, Fantasy Pros Championship. Anything labeled with Draftathon, that is where that money is going to be going from. To Casey to the Rescue as well. So with that out of the way, good luck, happy drafting this weekend, and maybe a player that you want to be targeting a little bit earlier this weekend, Matt, is the freshly extended contract of Brandon Aiyuk in San Francisco. 4 years. He's going to be a 49er through 2028, $120 million total. This is a front-loaded deal. This according to Ian Rappaport, and Aiyuk banks $76 million guaranteed. He is now the highest paid receiver on the 49ers, ahead of Deebo Samuel, fifth among all wideouts in the NFL. And obviously, Aiyuk is a guy who was a super stud last year, led the San Francisco 49ers in targets, receptions, and yards, and he tied for the lead in touchdown receptions with both Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey. 18th among all receivers in target share last year, ahead of Deebo Samuel. This is going to be a player that, if you took the chance and drafted him a little bit later in your drafts, if you had drafted prior to this, this is why you draft early, to get deals like this. You're going to take advantage, or you're going to be very, very happy that Brandon Aiyuk is now in camp. The question I have for you, Matt, number one, is how much are you concerned about all this missed training camp time as far as what could happen with him in the early part of the season if he's not in football shape? Or I guess, is that sort of overblown, and that injuries can happen to anybody? Aiyuk is a young, healthy, virile guy, and maybe I'm overrating this. Your immediate reaction to Aiyuk and how his body you think is going to stand up?
Well, I'm a lot less concerned about anything football after you hit me with that video, Balky, to be honest. But I honestly, Brandon Aiyuk's been a guy that I've been wary of all offseason because his production last year was very reliant on high efficiency, the kind of yardage and scoring efficiency that's difficult to replicate. San Francisco is better than most teams are at supporting that and doing it year after year. So he's in a good spot to be higher than normal efficiency. I think, though, that this extension is probably going to bring back his ADP. He had been going round 2, maybe early round 3. It's kind of wavered some with all of the different reports. Like for a while there, we all thought he was going to Pittsburgh, which would have been terrible, maybe Washington. So it's a good outcome for him. If you already have him on your team, it's a positive for sure. I think somebody's probably still going to draft him before I want to, just because overall I'm wary of how safe he is to put in my lineup week after week. I think I can find more reliable weekly scorers in that range.
So with the injury stuff, is there something there in regards to that? I guess we're feeling it out in the dark because we don't really know, right?
That's the thing. I don't know of any research that says these guys who hold out are more likely to get hurt. I think you can probably think of examples of both. So I don't have anything solid where I can say he's more likely to, but it's one more I don't know risk factor. I mean, it can't be good to miss a week of practice and then go play against a bunch of guys who have been doing the full practice load for a month. That said, he also hasn't taken the dings that some of his teammates have. So I think there's positive or negative in that. If he's in round 4, I'm certainly willing to take Brandon Aiyuk. I think any earlier than that, I'm probably a little uncomfortable with it.
I just looked at the Fantasy Mojo ADP data on the Fantasy Pros Championship on him right now, 410. So he has fallen a little bit more than I realized, past DJ Moore, Michael Pittman, and now he's settled in at the 410, still going ahead of Stephon Diggs and T. Higgins. I would expect Aiyuk to move up. Obviously, during Draftathon weekend, we're going to see a lot more people more confident in drafting him now that they know that everybody's on the same page there in San Francisco. Now, one of the players that he is also fallen behind that he might move ahead of now and in Kansas City, and that's Rashee Rice, who was actually in the news today. Jeff Miller from the NFL said that the NFL has continued to monitor the legal developments surrounding Rashee Rice. Brian McCarthy, who heads up the NFL's PR department, added that he's not going to be placed on the commissioner's exempt list unless there is a material change in the case. And that's the quote from McCarthy here. December 9th is the next time he's due in court. That will be after the first 14 weeks of the season. And it sounds like, well, this, anytime you hear stuff like legal stuff like this, your ears kind of perk up a little bit to it. But it sounds like, Matt, kind of nothing was said today. Nothing that would change the way that we've been handling Rashee Rice. I just said 408 is where he's going right now. Is that still the same spot from that you would be drafting him just when we take in the legal circumstances surrounding him?
Yeah, I'm absolutely fine with him in round 4. I watched him go 14th overall in one Best Ball Live draft that I did earlier this week. So he's going to be all over the place in those early rounds. He has rebounded in a big way as we've gotten close to the season with no suspension. I'm drafting him as though there's no suspension. I think the bigger question is how much target share he loses versus what he had in the second half of last year. Now that Xavier Worthy's around, once Marquise Brown's shoulder is healthy, I would imagine that he doesn't get as much target share as he did late last season. So that's why I'd be hesitant to take him higher than round 4, but I think he's fine in that range because if he does stay as the Chiefs wide receiver 1, he can certainly pay off at that level. And I think that's going to be a good place to be a wide receiver for sure.
Yeah. Kansas City is a good place to be a wide receiver, just as long as Patrick Mahomes is there, right? I mean, we just love it. And we'll see what happens with Rice, legally speaking, but I think that conversation may be put to bed now officially until 2025. Now, another situation that's evolving, a similar one to Brandon Aiyuk's, is Ja'Marr Chase. So one day after, Zach Taylor, the head coach of Cincinnati, said that he expects Ja'Marr Chase to play in week 1, the receiver decides not to practice. And then Taylor says the next day, quote, "I think I probably put my foot in my mouth speaking too quickly. Again, this is a day-to-day situation. We'll just keep seeing it as that." I felt comfy cozy on Sunday drafting him on my Sunday night draft, Matt, at the 7th overall pick. I thought this is going to be a good deal. He's back at practice, and now I'm not really sure what to think. I don't believe he practiced again today. Zach Taylor did say yesterday that Chase could play in the opener, even if he doesn't practice the rest of this week. I don't know if you have a material change in the way that you feel about Chase, the way that you would draft him at this point. He was going at the 107 on average in the Fantasy Pros Championship. This is kind of a curveball here. We thought this was resolved, and apparently it's not.
Here's the material change for me. I wasn't sure as of yesterday or the day before who I would take among Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson. Like, I would hit that range, and I probably would not treat it the same way every time, would go various permutations. Now I'm definitely taking Jamar Chase after all those guys: Jefferson, ARSB, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson. I think that puts him at 8th at the earliest. And then you're looking at AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua. I can't tell anybody to take any of those guys over Jamar Chase. I haven't faced that in a draft, so I am honestly not sure exactly which way I would go. I would still be uncomfortable with leaving Jamar Chase on the board to take AJ Brown or Garrett Wilson or Puka, even though he's back practicing. But I mean, it's a total unknown, like we said with Aiyuk. It could be that he's been working out great, that he's in great shape, and that he's ready to go as soon as he hits the practice field, next week ahead of the game, and he's regular Jamar Chase on Sunday. But I don't know. So that I don't know makes it especially iffy in round 1. And I think that's the range where you have a personal decision to make.
Do you feel like this is the time to take chances with a pick like that this late in the season, or is it okay to draft scared and take somebody else, like you'd mentioned, like St. Brown or anybody like that? Because at this point, I still see a ton of upside with all these other guys, and they're practicing. They're not unhappy with their contract, or at least publicly they're not. This is probably the time. Like, I'd be fine to like not get cute here this early in the draft, this late in the season.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm in a big money draft and I'm picking 8th and Jamar Chase is there, and after him is AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, Puka, I'm probably taking Jamar Chase, but I'm also probably drafting that team a little bit differently over the next few rounds than I might have if Jamar Chase had no issues around him. Maybe I'm more willing to take that wide receiver in round 2, or take wide receivers in both round 3, round 4, depending on who the players are. I want to fortify that spot just in case Jamar Chase is not on the field in week 1, because once the season starts, these weeks get, shorter and shorter. Like, the season gets shorter and shorter once we get into the year. He can easily play 15, 16 regular season games and pay off for us. But if you lose week 1, suddenly you're in a bit of a hole. So I would definitely draft some insurance against that possibility.
Matt Shauf joining me from DraftSharks.com. Let's move on and talk Russell Wilson here and move past the disgruntled wide receiver conversation. Russell Wilson is not disgruntled because he is starting against the Atlanta Falcons in week 1, as reported by Jay Glazer from Fox Sports. He did miss some time this month with a calf injury, and obviously the Justin Fields truthers were out and saying that, this is going to be his gig, but it's not going to be his gig, at least to start off. Now, Wilson was 10 of 12, 6.1 yards per attempt in the preseason, 15 dropbacks. He was sacked 3 times on him. They have George Pickens at wideout. They don't have Roman Wilson. They have something called a Van Jefferson there as well, who could be starting. Like, this is not great. I want to know when you look at like a SuperFlex best ball tournament, which we have going on with the FFPC, where you obviously can't change out these players. Is Wilson still a guy that you'd count on as your number 3 quarterback, or is it best to look elsewhere here?
I mean, would I count on him? I wouldn't be
as your number 3. I
wouldn't be excited to draft him, but I would certainly take him 3rd. I think it would depend on who I have as my first 2, whether I would take Wilson or Fields, but I would certainly lean toward Wilson between them because I'd rather take the guy that I know is starting. I mean, there's nothing exciting here. This is a quarterback and an offense that you draft because it's fine at the time and you don't have better options. It's not somebody to target. I'm not targeting receivers in this offense. I think if anything, this development is good for the running backs because Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren are going to get more targets from Russell Wilson than they would from Justin Fields, where they would turn into scrambles instead.
I think that I shouldn't say this. I like Warren. I like Harris this year. I'm interested in those guys. Outside of that, I think the only guy you can make a case for is Freiermuth. Do you think Freiermuth is any better with Wilson or Fields as his quarterback?
Yeah, I think any of the pass catchers are better off with Russell Wilson just because fewer pass attempts, fewer dropbacks are going to turn into rushes.
The AFC West is the home of the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. And for as long as I can remember, probably since the Clinton administration, we have been chasing the backup running back for Kansas City in drafts. We always want to know who the guy behind the guy is there. the Chiefs apparently have added former Denver Broncos running back Samaje Perine to their active roster. Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Carson Steele were the backups there. Deneric Prince was released. And Carson Steele obviously got a lot of people excited in preseason. I think that with the addition of this between the tackles banger, a guy that is reliable if non-explosive or unexplosive, I think that this kind of muddies the waters even more, Matt, when you're looking at the Chiefs backup running back. Let's say you're in a closed 12-team league and you draft Pacheco, you want his handcuff. Or let's say you're drafting in a national competition like the Fantasy Pros Championship, and maybe you want to grab other owners in your leagues, their backup running backs, and to make, increase the variance and get you a super loaded team come to the playoff sprint. Now knowing that Perine is on this roster, who is the Chiefs backup running back that Matt Shauf would draft?
I got 3 different answers for you here. First, I don't want any of them. I'm probably taking some other backup other than the Chiefs backup, because if there is a committee, and I don't think any of these guys is going to be the fill-in if Isaiah Pacheco goes down. I think it's going to be a committee, and none of them is going to be somebody that you can just put in your lineup. So I'm really not interested. Now, if I have to pick one and I'm in just a regular 12-team league, I'm going to go with Perine because I think he's most likely to get most of the touches. He's at least a reliable passing down guy. He's a veteran player who has seen the field for multiple teams, and the Chiefs got him immediately after he hit the market and reportedly tried to trade for him, not tried to, but talked to Denver about trading for him before he got released. So they were interested. That to me says they think he's an upgrade over what they already had. If I'm talking about a large tournament and I want ultimate upside, I'm going to take a shot on Carson Steele, because even if the Chiefs right now think Samaje Perine is the best fill-in if Pacheco goes down, once they all take the field and get some touches, I think Steele's the one that we don't know what the upside is. Maybe he just, he gets this opportunity and he has this huge game and the Chiefs are like, oh, we got to keep handing this guy the ball. So that's the one I would bet on if I need ultimate upside to beat a large field. Overall, though, it's a situation I'm avoiding.
Know your league, know your competition, know the format, because it will change the answer here for you as well. We'll go to the YouTube chat for the next question. Paul Teixeira, a longtime FFPC player who I've interviewed before. He says, Balky, give us the scoop on your Packers backfield now with Dillon gone. And Dillon might be gone for good. I know Green Bay's very concerned with this neck injury, and you know how cautious the Packers medical staff is. And certainly Dillon, his career in Green Bay might be done. His NFL career might be done. Way too early to say that right now, but there's a non-zero chance of it. So we shift to the here and now. Josh Jacobs is clearly the starter, Matt. After that, with Marshawn Lloyd missing all this time with 2 different injuries in training camp, Emmanuel Wilson basically is the de facto number 2 running back behind Jacobs right now. How do you handle these guys if you're drafting this weekend? Do you bump Jacobs up because you think he's probably going to get more of the touches in that backfield? Do you start taking Emmanuel Wilson late? How far does Marshawn Lloyd fall, knowing that he's not healthy? There's a lot to unpack in this backfield as well.
I'm old enough to remember watching Emmanuel Wilson on Webster, but I'm not too interested in him right now as a handcuff. I am feeling a bit better about Josh Jacobs now. I honestly viewed him as a bust earlier on because he was dealing with some, nagging minor injuries after a very inefficient season last year. Marshawn Lloyd's an exciting runner who had some explosive play in college. So, I was wondering if they were also serious about getting A.J. Dillon involved. We heard lots of positives from Matt LaFleur about A.J. Dillon. So with Dillon out for the season, with Lloyd dealing with injuries, I think there's a much better chance that we get at least near workhorse level work for Josh Jacobs right away. And if he pays off for me early in the season, then I think it's going to work out. So if we're talking about a large tournament, I'll take those early weeks where he's a workhorse and then see where I go from there, because I can draft other running backs. If I'm playing in a single league, then I might even have the opportunity to trade Josh Jacobs from early in the season. So, a couple weeks ago, I was not that interested. Right now, I think he's a pretty solid pick, especially in like the 3-4 turn area if he makes it to that range.
I think that it's so weird. Like, Jacobs was not a player that I thought I was all that interested in, like you. And then I had 2 different salary cap drafts this past weekend. And somehow I ended up with Jacobs as my top running back on both of them. I don't know how that works. But because this is not just like, hey, he fell to me, I'm drafting him. I was physically bidding on him to pick him up. I don't know how it happens. It happens sometimes. Now, as difficult as the Chiefs and the Packers situations have become, as far as their backfields go, the Dallas one is a enigma wrapped in a riddle, smothered in secret sauce. I don't know what to think here, because Adam Schefter reported that the Cowboys have signed Dalvin Cook. He joins a robust backfield, including Ezekiel Elliott, Rico Dowdle, and Deuce Vaughn. This is his age 29 season. He had shoulder surgery last year, and really, as Shane Hallam wrote for DraftSharks.com, has not been the same player as he was earlier in his career. Now, I am not excited about Dalvin Cook, Matt, but I do need to be cognizant that he is in Dallas now. So if I liked Elliott or Dowdle or Vaughn as mid to late round picks before, I have to understand that Dalvin Cook is going to make liking those guys and drafting those guys a little bit more difficult. For your drafts, if you're looking at a Cowboys running back, who's it going to be? Or is the simplest answer just say, Balky, avoid this backfield whatsoever? I don't know what's going to happen.
If you were liking those guys in the middle rounds before, I hope you're getting the emotional care that you need, because you are in need. I think it's touching, honestly. I think the Cowboys are kind of doing for running backs what Chris Lambert's doing for dogs, and they're rescuing these guys that just don't have another home. I think the most interesting thing about the Dalvin Cook signing, honestly, is that workout video of him being jacked that was floating around on X this week. I'm so happy that this backfield is a committee, because I don't want any of these guys. And it's so much easier to ignore it when there are 3 or 4 guys to ignore than it is when there are 1 or 2. If it was just Zeke and Rico Dowdle, I'd be like, all right, maybe I should take Zeke here. Maybe I should take Rico Dowdle there. But now that there's a bunch of them, I'm like, all right, you guys can have any of them. I'm not at all interested. I have taken Deuce Vaughn at the very end of best ball drafts, just in case, because he's something different. It's just his second season. He's got speed. Maybe something happens this year. The other guys, I already know they're either old or not that good.
If you want to draft any Cowboys running backs or don't want to draft them, scan the QR code on your screen right now, join the Fantasy Pros Championship, and you can make your voice heard by how you're going to handle Cowboys running backs. Let's talk about a more exciting backfield, and that's Miami's, Matt. The Dolphins, on their initial 53-man roster, decided to keep only 4 receivers: Hill, Waddle, Malik Washington, and Braxton Berrios. Cameron Wolfe, who works for the NFL Network, said this might mean more snaps for Devon Achane as a wide receiver. Now, he's been doing this in camp already, and if he is out there at wide receiver in the slot or wherever, that means he and Mostert can be on the field at the same time, or maybe some instances where Jalen Wright and he are on the field at the same time. That's a lot of speed that can be on this team. And obviously, Achane could be set up for even more volume, which is what we're always looking for from our running backs if he's out there receiving. Mike McDaniel said in June that he was trying to find different ways to get Achane the ball. Well, one way to do it is to be throwing to him. The Dolphins used 21 personnel at the highest rate in the league last year, and that could even go up this year. We'll see what happens. You got to pay a premium to get him. Right now in the Fantasy Pros Championship, Devon Achane is running back 9, going at the 211 right now, Matt. Is this a piece of news that is just filling the time in training camp right now? Or is there something to this that Achane could not only be on the field more, but catching more passes, which is like double bonus if that happens for Achane owners?
I think it's kind of both, because I don't think they kept 4 receivers because they plan to use Devon Achane there a lot. Odell Beckham, I believe, is on the PUP, so he's going to be coming back at some point. So to me, it's more them saying we can get by with these 4 wideouts until Odell is back, and there are other players that we don't want to dump to be able to keep a 5th wide receiver in the meantime. For some running backs, you might say like, it worries me that they're thinking about running him a wide receiver because that means they don't want him in the backfield. That doesn't worry me here. Obviously, when you take Devon Achane, you're already taking a guy that's going to see limited touch volume versus other running backs. So when I hear even the potential of them being creative with his touches, that's good news to me. I want them to be creative with his touches. I trust Mike McDaniel to be creative with those touches to get Achane into spots where he can use that explosive speed. And, that's what we're relying on is big plays off of fewer touches here. I think anybody drafting Achane knows that they're taking a boom bust type. So the more boom spots that you can put him in, the better. And, you know what you're getting when you draft him and try to draft around him, like maybe get a more consistent, like higher floor, lower ceiling running back to pair him with.
Yeah, I think that's smart advice. And you might even be able to get 2 of those guys on your team too, if you go with Achane in the second or even the early third round. Paul Teixeira is drafting the Fantasy Pros Championship tonight, and he's targeting Dalvin Cook in the 21st round of a 20-round draft. So that's all you need to know about the Cowboys.
Might be too early.
Might be too. It still could be a reach, Paul. It still could be a reach there. Kyren Williams is the latest weird thing going on, and your colleague Jared Smola posted this on Draft Sharks. This is weird that not only are the Rams using a running back as a punt returner, it's a starting running back as a punt returner this year. DJ Dallas, the only running back in the NFL to return more than 7 punts, and he was like 3rd on the depth chart last year. So to Sean McVay, to have him come out and say that not only Williams is going to be our punt returner, is going to be our primary punt returner, it's another way to get him touches. This is obviously on the surface concerning. Is this concerning to you? Should this be concerning to anybody who already has Kyren Williams on their team or thinking about drafting him at the 211, that same spot that Devon Achane's going right now, Matt? Or is this kind of a nothing burger? I guess the other thing we could look at this too is if Kyren Williams is out there on punt returns, does this mean Blake Corum shouldering more of an offensive load? I don't know. There's a lot of things to unpack here. I would look back and say like, okay, this is what happened before. This kind of thing is unprecedented. So I don't really know what I can go back and look at.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is none of us really knows what to make of this. We can only take Sean McVay at his word and decide how much to trust. To me, I think he probably is willing to do it more because Blake Corum is there, because he knows that if he loses Kyren Williams, his backfield's in a better position than it was last year when they had to just take in everybody who was on the street, who had previously played running back in the NFL and try to, stitch together a backfield. So they're in better shape now. And I think within that, now he's like, this is my favorite guy to return punts among what we have, because he did return a couple last year, I believe it was. And the other guy who was returning punts, Austin Trammell, I believe, is not on the team anymore. So I believe that Sean McVay is probably looking at his group saying, I really like him to return punts. If we lose him, we have insurance now. So I'm okay with it. That sounded like what he said when he said we have Blake Corum and that Ronnie Rivers is really improved. The other thing is the Rams back in 2020 actually had Cooper Kupp returning punts. He wasn't the primary, but he returned 9 punts to something like 15 to 17 for the leader. So he was a significant punt returner, and he also led the team in receptions that year. So Sean McVay is not scared to use a key offensive player to return punts if it's his best option. It's not what he's done most years, but that probably also has not been his best option most years. So I'm not more worried now about Kyren Williams than I was before, but before I was already worried about Kyren Williams. He's already 4th highest in injury risk among running backs, according to our Draft Sharks injury guide, which comes with a combo of injury history and expected workload. And both of those things are, a bit worrisome for Kyren Williams. This certainly puts him out there for a bit more injury risk. If the team decreases his workload a bit, that makes the injury risk a bit less, but it also is going to take away from running back you're probably drafting in round 2 if he's not touching the ball as much. So just all together with where you have to draft him now, I think there is more downside risk than there is upside. We already know he's not likely to score touchdowns at as high a rate as he did last year. So honestly, where he's going, it's just somebody that I've been trying to stay away from anyway.
Yeah, Permar99 pointing out in the chat, like they had nothing behind him last year. So it's like it's kind of an outliers type season for Kyren Williams. Johnny on the spot, producer Matt Deutsch, pointing out that in 2023, Trammell returned 25 punts last year. Kyren Williams returned 3 punts, and only those 2 returned punts in 2023. However, we go back to 2020, some guy named Cooper Kupp returned 9 of them there. And wouldn't that just be so Sean McVay to mix in Cooper Kupp returning punts this year with Kyren Williams too? We love it. Action scoring at the FFPC. Plenty of people would love it. We love Matt Shauf. We love DraftSharks.com. He's joining us as the co-host for the first hour tonight. When we come back, we're going to talk SuperFlex drafting strategy. How do you handle the quarterbacks? What happens if your league mates start letting quarterbacks slip to you? And at what point should you try to have a second quarterback? Should you try to have a third quarterback in your league? It's all SuperFlex all the time. Matt Shauf and Eric Balkman here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Don't go anywhere. We're talking about much, much more right after this.
Flair once said, if you want to be the man, you got to beat the man. And if you want to be the man or woman this fantasy football season, you got to play over at myffpc.com. That's where all the best fantasy gamers play. That's where all the high stakes gamers play because they've got the high stakes leagues. They have the best formats. They have the best payouts. It's the place to be. And if you win a FFPC main event or a Fantasy Pros Championship contest over there, you put some serious respect on your name and some money in your pocket. Anyone can win their hometown league, right? You're probably a great fantasy gamer. Prove it. You go out and win an event like this, you can go and put in your Twitter bio or X bio, FFPC main event champion. That means something. That's definitive proof that you're one of the best fantasy gamers in the world. So go over to myffpc.com and use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more. And now you're on your road to greatness, right? You could even do an online draft, or you can go and draft in Las Vegas with the stars. Draft at Planet Hollywood for the FFPC main event. That's where they're all doing it. It's awesome stuff. So get set up now so that you can be a star this year. You can be the man. Just like Ric Flair, you can be a champion. Woo!
22 minutes until the top of the hour here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. He's Matt Shauf from DraftSharks.com. And speaking of DraftSharks.com, hey, how about this SuperFlex? Not only tips for SuperFlex leagues, but the complete SuperFlex drafting guide, Matt, that you put together. No matter where you are picking in your league, you put together the targets that you should be focusing on from spots 1 and 2, 3 and 4, whatever, what have you, all the way through the entire draft, which seems like overkill, but we love overkill in content in fantasy football because there is no question that was left unanswered after I read this. And I want to talk with you about this too, just sort of like SuperFlex tips in general. I know Kevin English put together a list of tips in the SuperFlex guide that you had posted on Draft Sharks. What's the best way to handle quarterbacks? How do you properly do it? Because it's kind of like a nuanced thing. It's a balancing thing. Maybe the best advice that you can give is like, they are not the end all be all. There's still other positions, even in a SuperFlex league, right?
Yeah, the biggest, if you take away one rule, I would say be flexible. And it sounds like too vague, but people go into a SuperFlex draft thinking I have to get my 2 quarterbacks and then the draft starts. And that's just the wrong way. I'm going to already be ahead of you if that's how you start your draft, because there are going to be 6, 7, 8 people that do that. And they're going to be like, oh, now look, all the quarterbacks are gone. Like, now there's still like 10 of them left. I can still get 2 guys that are going to combine to be better than your second guy by the end of the season. And in the meantime, I have taken a wide receiver 1 and a running back 1. So be flexible. It doesn't mean you can't take 2 quarterbacks to start it. And I think that it ultimately depends on the players who make it to you, but that flexibility will allow you to start well.
I think being flexible is just good advice in SuperFlex or not, right? Because I mean, we talk about, we just saw the rejoin for the FFPC main event, right? $1 million grand prize, drafts going on all the time at myffpc.com. That format, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, a tight end, 2 flexes. So that is the ultimate. We're going to reward you for being flexible in that format, where you could take the value as it comes to you in the draft and build a juggernaut any which way too. So let's talk about getting back to the SuperFlex issues. I guess this doesn't really pertain to Superflex, but in general, Jalen Hurts, is he your number one quarterback this year? And if so, why? Because there's a guy named Saquon Barkley in that backfield this year who wasn't there last year.
He is, and he's not way ahead of Josh Allen, but it's a bit of a flip because Josh Allen's been the top quarterback for the past few years. So I guess it's more about what Josh Allen loses than it is about Jalen Hurts. They were both very good last year. They actually both ran for 15 touchdowns. Like, one of the big challenges I hear people raise for Jalen Hurts is it was all the tush push last year. He's not going to score that many touchdowns now that Barkley's there, and he'll probably lose some, but both he and Josh Allen ran for 15 touchdowns. Jalen Hurts is the one who has run for 10 plus in 3 straight seasons. He's still in just his 5th year. He's still young, still developing. He got Kellen Moore as his OC, didn't lose anything among his pass catchers. We'll see if Jahan Dotson is an addition or just a guy that's now on the team. But Josh Allen lost Stephon Diggs, who has been the only number 1 type receiver he's had. He also lost Gabe Davis, which I know everybody's snickering at that because he's let every single fantasy owner down at some point. But he's also a tall, fast, talented guy who has had some big games, who catches long touchdowns. We'll see. Maybe Keon Coleman is that plus more. Maybe they cobble together everything. But their OC, Joe Brady, is also somebody that I don't totally trust. He got fired after a year and a half in Carolina. His offense, he got credit last year for the Bills supposedly turning things around late. He got lucky because that team stopped turning the ball over the final 6 games. The offense didn't get any better after they moved on from Ken Dorsey. And if anything, he seemed to misuse Stephon Diggs over that stretch and lean a bit too much on the run. So I'm not sure that offense is going to be as good as it has been. I'm pretty sure Philly's offense is going to be very good, probably better than it was last year. Will Barkley take some short yardage touchdowns? Probably, but if he's running well and producing, that whole offense is going to be healthy, and I'm not worried about Jalen Hurts getting his points.
The Brady thing is interesting because I hadn't considered that there were other factors. This is why we go deep with Draft Sharks, because I just assumed, he took over, the running game really improved. But the fact is, if the team stops turning the ball over, that's going to make any running game improve, which is interesting that you bring that up. Patrick Mahomes is a 2-time defending Super Bowl champion quarterback.
Who?
He gets back Travis Kelce this year, and the Chiefs also added Hollywood Brown. They spend their first round pick on Xavier Worthy this year. They're also going to have Rashee Rice. It's seemingly, we talked about it at the top of the show, seemingly for the entire season. There's a lot of weapons here. There's a lot to like about Mahomes. Now, he doesn't run maybe as much as you'd like from your number 1 quarterback in a Superflex league. However, the weapons are great. The talent is elite. What kind of year is Mahomes in for this season?
It should be a very good one. I mean, clearly with their moves, the Chiefs said, look, we've got Patrick Mahomes, and we left him without anybody to go deep downfield last year. Marquez Valdez-Scantling did not work out, so they let him go. They brought in a speedster in free agency, Hollywood Brown. They drafted a speedster early. They clearly said, we don't want another season like last year where it was a career low ADOT for Mahomes. His touchdown efficiency, his touchdown rate was down. I think both of those numbers will rebound. Yeah, he doesn't run as much as either Hurts or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, but we still have Mahomes projected as the number 3 quarterback in between those top 2 we already talked about and Lamar Jackson. He's going to have, as much week to week explosive potential as anybody because he's easily the best passer among those guys. And he's gotten his weapons, renovated this year.
He does have them renovated, and that offense looks like quite the mansion, and it's going to be fun drafting Mahomes for sure. When you're sort of analyzing how the best time to take your quarterbacks in these drafts, Matt, are there any significant tier breaks between the quarterbacks? I've heard there's a difference between the top 4 and then it goes down to the 7th, and then it goes to like 10th or something like that. What do you think about tier breaks as far as Superflex leagues are concerned, where you should try to target this guy, but then after he goes, you want to wait for the next tier? Is there something to be said for that in 2024?
I think for me, the important tier break for Superflex is right around 11, right behind Kyler Murray, right ahead of Jared Goff, Brock Purdy. There's not a big difference in our standard projections between Kyler Murray and Jared Goff, but I think the difference in upside is pretty clear. Kyler Murray could finish among the top 4 quarterbacks this year because of the rushing and passing combo. Jared Goff, I don't think, has that same kind of upside. And if you look at the Superflex guide that you mentioned, every spot throughout round 1, I've got quarterbacks in the recommendations. And so probably wherever I'm picking in round 1, I'm going to target a quarterback. Some of that's based on ADP. There might be spots where it comes up in an actual draft where I'm deciding and I take, McCaffrey or CeeDee Lamb in round 1 and then come back in round 2. But I want to generally get at least one quarterback in either my first round or second round pick, because I think right around that 1-2 turn is where I'm likely to see a drop off.
Interesting. Okay. So for Matt Shauf SuperFlex teams, he wants to have one quarterback by the end of the second round, right?
Yes. And it doesn't mean that I won't take 2, but I want to get one at least among those first 2 picks and then kind of see what happens otherwise.
So you will take 2 quarterbacks, I'm assuming, if they're just flying off the board and everybody's treating them like, like they're looting the quarterback position, some sort of riots going on in their draft.
Actually, quite the opposite. I'm more likely
okay.
to take 2. I'm more likely to take 2 if I'm in a draft that is going slower at quarterback. So I take, somebody like, I don't know, Dak Prescott at 8, and then it gets back to me early in round 2 and Jaden Daniels is still there. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go ahead and take these 2 guys who both have top 5 upside at the position. And then I'm just going to push quarterback for a long time. I don't even necessarily need a third starter. I'll probably take a third before, the top 30 are off the board, but that's when I'm more likely to take 2. If the whole league, if 12 of them go in round 1, I'm definitely taking a position player in round 2. Quite possibly in round 3, because people are then going to be like, oh yeah, crap, I need running backs and wide receivers. And I'll just wait and snatch up 2 to 3 of the truly late guys that aren't attractive, but look much better when you're, piecing them together in your lineup.
How do you make sense of the draft when quarterbacks are going, right? Like what determines, like, oh my goodness, they're flying, or what determines, like, my God, nobody's taking any quarterback? Like, and we just heard what you would do in that situation if they're sliding, right? You're more likely to take 2. If they're going off the board, then you're just gobbling up running backs and receivers, and you'll worry about your second quarterback later. What about this, Matt? And I know I'm throwing a lot at you here. What happens if you take an elite guy right away, and then a ton of them go? You're getting top 5 running backs, top 5 receivers, right? At what point do you take your second quarterback? And then is 2 quarterbacks enough? Or do you still need to take a third, even though your second and third are not going to be great?
I would never feel good about not having 3 starting quarterbacks, unless I just miscalculate and it doesn't work out that way, in which case I'll grab several backups, like the handcuff running backs. But I do want to get 3. If I get 2 good ones, then certainly I'm waiting and taking a very late third. Sam Darnold, Bo Nix, Bryce Young, I think, is somebody who's going very late at quarterback who could surprise relative to his draft position. Geno Smith is a specific value for me. So it really comes down more to specific players and exactly who makes it to me at what spot. And that's why I start out with flexibility, because I don't, it's not, I want to make sure I have this by this round. I want to take 2 running backs by the end of round 5.
Right.
It's like, if I get to round 5 and I just don't like the running backs, and I think that there's this group of them that are going to be there over the next 2 rounds, then I might take a quarterback there, regardless of how I started at that position, or, vice versa. If the running backs look awesome and I feel like I need a second quarterback, but I see several guys and I think I can wait, then I'll push that off until the next turn.
Do you have a feel on how the fantasy public treats quarterbacks in SuperFlex leagues? In other words, when you go into a draft, do you have a preconceived notion of, like, I think this is how the quarterbacks are probably going to go here because this is how Joe Q public values them? Or are SuperFlex drafts still so, I don't want to say nuanced, but still so all over the place that you can't really have a preconceived notion of how your 11 league mates are going to be drafting the position when you go into it?
That's the biggest thing. We do have ADP on Draft Sharks for SuperFlex drafts, but I mean, anybody who has done a number of SuperFlex drafts knows that you can't really trust it to go according to ADP. Now, if you're drafting in a tournament where people are drafting a bunch of teams, then that's a little bit more sure ADP wise, and you can probably count on things going pretty much like that. There will be some surprises, but things will probably progress like that because everybody's getting their exposures and all that. But in a standalone SuperFlex league, that's one of the things I love about it is you have no idea. I mean, it totally depends on how experienced players are, how they feel about individual players. And that's why I just make sure that I know everybody. I know exactly how to draft, taking who I get and where, and whoever you decide to give me first, I know how I'm going to go from there. And it's really just about getting in the draft practice so that you can see the pockets, you can see the tiers, you can see the groups, when it's okay to wait, when, there's only one more guy in this level, even though I don't want to take that position here, I'm going to go ahead and do it. It's really about getting to know it, getting practice, or at least finding somebody whose knowledge on it you trust enough to go with their draft tools.
And Draft Sharks is a great one to trust. Obviously, you guys have won awards for your projections before. So the other thing I want to ask, speaking of Draft Sharks, I know you guys were very effusive in your praise for Jaden Daniels this year, as am I. I pounded out 9 drafts this weekend, and I think I had Jaden Daniels on 4 of them, and I was pretty happy about it. I have been struggling to see the downside with Daniels this year, but I know it exists. It's out there somewhere in the void. I just can't find it because all I see is him piling up rushing yardage, him throwing touchdowns, Cliff Kingsbury running things there, and obviously, McLaurin and Sinnott and all these guys, and De'Ami Brown, who he seems to have a connection with too. So I'm seeing a lot of positives with Jaden Daniels. However, I don't want to get too excited. In a SuperFlex draft, Matt, how high is too high for Jaden Daniels? Right now, he's going off as quarterback number 11, I want to say. Quarterback 10. Because he's moved past Prescott now. He's going as quarterback 10. Is that too high, or should we still be drafting Daniels with confidence even after 9 quarterbacks have gone off the board?
Yeah, I think that's where he belongs. Honestly, I think the only downside risk to Jaden Daniels is he gets hurt. He could have a bad season in terms of how he plays and still produce fantasy-wise. We all like to look at Kyler Murray, Cam Newton, Justin Fields, whomever, more recently as the examples of why you draft running quarterbacks. One that stands out to me for all time is Vince Young. In his rookie season, he stunk. He threw more interceptions than touchdowns. I think he finished with like 12 touchdown passes. He finished 11th, I believe, 11th or 12th in fantasy points per game among quarterbacks because of that rushing. Now, I know it's a whole different group of quarterbacks now, and that was one season, but it just falls in line with how running at quarterback gives you that floor. You can not do everything else as well. Robert Griffin III in his rookie season for Washington didn't throw nearly as many passes as the other quarterbacks around him. He was top 5, top 6 in scoring average that season. So when you're able to rush the way that Jaden Daniels can, it not only gives you the boom ceiling, but it gives you the fantasy floor that the other things don't have to be as good, and you'll still succeed.
Yeah, that's what I love. I don't want to say cheat code, but it is a little bit more encouraging to try to draft a quarterback like that with that rushing capability, with those legs. And I think that goes into part of what the science says about finding a sleeper quarterback. There's certain criteria you got to hit. There's certain things you look for. Matt, in your super flex drafts, when you're looking for a quote unquote sleeper at quarterback, what are you looking for? And maybe who meets that criteria this season?
Well, I already let it slip a little bit, but Geno Smith, and it's more about who than what, because every quarterback has a different package of what makes them valuable. If we talk about rushing, and I think Daniel Jones is a bit of a sleeper for that reason, because if he's, good enough physically as the regular season goes on, he's going to add that rushing floor that boosts him up from where he's starting out. But I'm excited about Geno Smith because just 2 years ago, he was QB8 in points per game. He had less talent around him then than he does now, just because Jackson Smith-Njigba was not there at that point. Now he's in his second season. He's got a brand new offensive coordinator that ran a pass-heavy, very friendly to the quarterback offense at Washington in Seattle now. And Geno Smith is going at the very bottom of QB2 range. So very low risk where you're drafting him. Already showed us a QB1 level ceiling. So that he's in my pocket as a reason that I don't feel like I need to get that second quarterback early. I can take one in the first round. Then I can say, if Geno Smith is the next quarterback I take and I follow him with Will Levis or Daniel Jones or Bryce Young or 2 of those guys, if I have those 4 quarterbacks, I guarantee you somebody in my league is going to be like, look, Matt forgot you have to play a second quarterback in this league. And I'm going to be like, we'll see who's laughing when we get to December, pal.
I always think, especially for like a best ball tournament or just best ball in general, when you're talking about super flex, I always think one of the most difficult things to get a handle on is how do I draft the quarterback situations that are undecided or even worse, expected to be changing once the season starts. Jacoby Brissett just got named the starting quarterback for New England over Drake May after Gerard Mayo already said May has outplayed Brissett. This does not seem like a situation where May is going to be on the bench long, or maybe he will. Russell Wilson versus Justin Fields. Wilson is the quarterback now, and yet Mike Tomlin is being a little bit cryptic of how Fields could be used, and maybe he's going to be used more than we think, and maybe he becomes the starter. So, and I think you could have said the same thing with the Vikings, with Darnold and McCarthy before McCarthy got hurt. Now I think you feel a lot more comfortable drafting Sam Darnold in these SuperFlex drafts. But how much do backup quarterbacks matter? How do you handle those guys, Matt, knowing that quarterbacks are coveted in this? And when it's best ball, you can't pick anybody up. Even if it's a managed league, you want to make sure that these guys aren't on the waiver wire, and you already have them on your squad. How do you handle guys in SuperFlex leagues where they're the backup, but they still matter?
It's important to read the individual situations. And I think, just the examples you brought up show several different ones. Historically, first round rookie quarterbacks play, and they play before the middle of the season. Obviously, that doesn't mean everybody. Patrick Mahomes sat the entire rookie season. Jordan Love sat for about 11 years, I think. So not everybody plays, but historically on average, they play like by week 4. It's early. So Drake May already has his coach saying, yeah, he outplayed the veteran. He's probably just scared that Drake May would get killed if he went out behind that offensive line right away. But at some point, the Pats are going to lose 2-3 straight games, and the coach is going to be like, all right, I guess it's time to throw the kid in there. So I would draft Drake May as though he's going to play soon. And when to draft him really depends on what you have already and how far he slips in the draft. So you have to watch that situation. Justin Fields is a weird one because we already know he'll produce when he's on the field. He failed out of his first test though. Like, will he start a game for Pittsburgh this year? Probably at some point, but I think it's much more likely that it'll need a Russell Wilson injury than that Russell Wilson does something that makes the Steelers turn to Justin Fields. I think if they were going to do that, they probably would have just gone ahead and done that to start the season. Maybe part of that is not wanting to make Russell Wilson angry after they signed him, telling him he was going to start. But, Justin Fields has been a starter in the league, has not been very good. So a very big difference between him and Drake May. I think another situation like the Raiders, I think we'll see both of those guys start games. So, let's go ahead and draft both Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. Make sure you don't draft either one too early, which I don't think anybody is. Beyond that, look for backups in positive spots. Anthony Richardson, his style obviously leaves him susceptible to some injury. Maybe he stays healthy all year. I hope he does. But we saw him get hurt twice last year in 4 games. So I would go ahead and stash Joe Flacco late in a SuperFlex draft. Any other situation like that you come across where there's some injury risk to that starter, or even just something iffy about that starter that gives the backup a shot, or even just a backup with upside if, an unforeseen injury befalls the starter. Jameis Winston's a pretty easy one in Cleveland as long as he sticks around there. There have been some weird rumors that Cleveland doesn't love him lately, but he looks like a clear backup in Cleveland where Deshaun Watson's missed some time. So that's another one where I would stash him as a backup.
Travis in the YouTube chat right now, SuperFlex League, he's got pick number 5. No idea where quarterback is going. And I can tell you this too. One of my co-hosts for my local radio show here in Northeast Wisconsin literally is drafting a SuperFlex draft right now at a bar where he had the 5th pick. And he didn't know how quarterbacks are going to go too. But if we go to the draft guide that you have written for Draft Sharks, we could tell Travis that the guy you really want there at the 5th pick is Anthony Richardson.
Yep. And it's a fine spot. Anthony Richardson, CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow. And if if Richardson goes earlier, it means somebody among the top 4 fell to you. So right. It might seem like, crap, I don't get any of the top 4 guys. It's a fine spot. Richardson's got plenty of upside, and maybe you get one of those top 4 falling.
Matt, this has been awesome tonight. We know you got to get scooting. We're going to get to our next guest here. But before we let you go, DraftSharks.com is where to go for award-winning content. You're obviously doing the award-winning podcast as well. Shauf DS on the X. Is that the best way to consume more Matt Shauf content?
Yeah, man, find the Draft Sharks YouTube channel, which we're putting multiple things out on every week throughout the season. So subscribe there. You'll get notified when new stuff hits. And, DraftSharks.com, you'll get everything that matters, all of the content we're talking about, as well as tools that will help you in your draft and throughout the regular season. Free agents, trades, we got all of it covered. You do have all of it covered. And I'm just looking at it right now, youtube.com/DraftSharks.
Draft Sharks Fantasy. That's the channel that you need to subscribe to. Keep up all the great work. Thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. And thanks so much for giving all these, all of our viewers and listeners everything that they need to know about SuperFlex drafts, because they're becoming more and more popular. And I know with our SuperFlex Best Ball tournament at the FFPC, we've never had as big of a prize pool. We've never had this many players sign up for it. And we should encourage all of them to check it out at draftsharks.com. Matt, thank you so much. Enjoy next week's opener on Thursday. And then it's your Eagles and my Packers on Friday night. That's going to be a fun game too. Enjoy it, dude.
And Brazil, huh? Thanks for having me on. I love doing this stuff. I always have fun coming on with you. I appreciate you letting me join you.
Absolutely. Anytime, Matt. We'll have you back on soon. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Optimus Fantasy Football's Nate Polvogt will join us. We're going to find out where he stands on certain players. We're going to put him on the clock to see who he would draft in certain situations. We got another hour here to go on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network.
In 2005, we selected him as a wounded warrior to come out as our guest to have a good time with passionate fantasy football players. He arrived in a wheelchair 11 months after he was critically injured in Iraq. I stayed in touch with him. He would reach out to me, update me on what was going on in his life, some of the trials and tribulations of his injuries. He lost his legs. He had a brain injury, but he kept forging on in his life. He joined the Paralympics. He really, really tried to continue on with his life, to serve his country, to be a good person. He had a rescue dog, which was a service dog for him. I lost touch with him around 2013. And then I Googled to see what he was up to, maybe with the Paralympics, and I realized that he had killed himself. And so that really impacted me for a person that I only met in person for just a couple days of my life. I knew I needed to carry on his memory, his dedication to just being a helpful person, and rescue dogs is what I wanted to do. I started a 501c3 and I named it Casey the Rescue after him. There's a couple coordinators and rescue people on the ground in Lexington that go to the shelters and pick up the dogs daily as they're being euthanized, hang on to them to the next time that I can get down there in my shuttle. I think that my record number on my shuttle was 92, which included litters of puppies, big dogs, little dogs, and a couple of cats. The best way that anybody in this fantasy football community can help is to play this weekend in the Fantasy Pros Championship. I'm so honored to be selected as the charity this year. The impact is humongous. It will be saving thousands of dogs.
You'll be able to help out Casey to the Rescue this weekend, the Fantasy Pros Championship chosen charity for Draftathon this weekend. When you register at myffpc.com, click on the Fantasy Pros Championship, any draft labeled with Draftathon. Those are the leagues that will be donating $50 to Casey to the Rescue for every one of those leagues that fill. You can also scan the QR code right in front of you as well. So 1,000+ dogs saved last year, hopefully many more this year. Again, sometimes hours before they're due to be euthanized. A great charity and a fantastic thing that our very own Chris Lambert from the FFPC does. Tireless worker, fantastic individual. And if you played in the FFPC and she's helped you out before, this is a way to help her out and give back. So myffpc.com and sign up for the Fantasy Pros Championship, and we'll make sure that those donations go to Casey to the Rescue. We have Nate Polvogt to the rescue right now. Coming up on the second hour of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network, Nate Polvogt, the co-founder of Optimus Fantasy, something very, very brand new, Nate. And I want to lead off our chat tonight with that. Tell us a little bit about Optimus Fantasy, how it came to be. It seems like you have quite the legion of contributors, writers, podcasters, content producers. It's been pretty exciting for you guys.
Yeah, well, first of all, Eric, thanks for having me on. It's always awesome to get to cut it up with you. This is one of my favorite things, especially leading into the season, to get to talk about all this draft stuff. And there's so much going on. to Optimus Fantasy, my wife and I, Jen, we kind of decided, we've been kicking around in this industry for 4 years. We wanted to do our own thing. We've been working independently from home for the last 6 years, and it just seemed like the next natural progression in our step in this industry. It's been a lot of work, but it's been a lot of fun too. I mean, you can't argue when you're working full time in sports media, right?
Right, exactly. Yes. I think, what we have been able to do as content creators sometimes get stifled a little bit because we have other things going on, or it's not coming to be because there's 24 hours in a day and we can't change that. But when you're working full time, you could dedicate it to, the majority of your day to that. You know that the stuff you're producing is good. You know how hard you worked on it. You know how hard you researched it, and you know what a benefit it's going to be for fantasy players as well. Nate can be followed on the X at Nate Polvogt. That's NatePolvogt, and then Optimus Fantasy Football at Optimus Fantasy as well. And right out of the gate, we got a question on the YouTube chat for you, Nate. Should I trade George Pickens and Chase Brown for James Cook in desperate need for another good running back? Obviously, this is in a vacuum, but in a vacuum, is that upgrade significant enough? Would you give up Pickens and then upgrade from Chase Brown to James Cook?
Yes, I would, but with a little bit of caution with James Cook, because what we know about James Cook is that he doesn't operate well inside the 20. He's not a goal line guy. He's not a short yardage guy. That's why they brought Ray Davis in. I get this sneaky feeling, Eric, that Ray Davis is going to snipe some work from James Cook. Still a solid RB2, high-end RB2. I think that he will be that RB like 13 to 16 to 18 range. But don't expect an RB1 season from him. But still, for Chase Brown and George Pickens, this is a good deal in my eyes.
And the other thing too with Pickens, we were just talking about this earlier in one of my other shows. Like I'm all aboard Najee Harris and especially Jaylen Warren this year. Outside of that, it's tough for me to get excited about anybody. I think I'm okay with Freiermuth, but Pickens, it's like, you look at where he's going in the FFPC main event right now. George Pickens is going off the board, wide receiver 31 at the 603. You need to pay an early 6th-round pick to get Pickens on your team, who, yes, should be the number one receiver, but at the same time, how big is that passing pie going to be, right? It may not be very big at all. And when you say number one receiver, it's kind of muted a little bit with Pickens. So when you give up Pickens and you can upgrade from Brown to Cook, I think it makes sense. However, little trepidation, not perfect, but that's why he's coming to the expert, Nate Polvogt, to ask him tonight. So I thought go ahead.
Just injury with George Pickens. I just want to say this, guys. It's an Arthur Smith offense. Yes, he's a wide receiver 1, but we know how odd Arthur Smith's usage is. It's really hard to trust anybody in this receiving core in Pittsburgh. So I like that point you made, Eric.
I want to I thought a fun way to do this, and by the way, Herms hanging out, former co-host of the show, who's actually coming back next month to co-host with me now with Optimus Fantasy as well, which is very cool. I thought a cool way to spend this first half hour here is to put you on the clock, Nate. And I'm going to go through FFPC main event ADP. I'm going to pick 2 players that are very, very close to each other, sometimes right next to each other, and we're going to find out how you would handle this. Now, this is a skewed exercise because some of these guys, it will depend upon what the rest of your fake team looks like at this point. So we'll try to push that to a side as much as we can, because I really want to dial in on how you feel about these players. Putting them next to each other, I think, is a good way to do it too. Jahmyr Gibbs or Jonathan Taylor is going to kick it off. A couple of running backs that are going at the end of round 1. Taylor at the 112. Jahmyr Gibbs has slipped to the 201 because of the injury. Who would you rather draft between Gibbs and Taylor this year, Nate? And by the way, I should assume we'll just assume FFPC scoring. So full PPR, tight end premium. Go ahead.
So I'm going to go with Jahmyr Gibbs here. We know that running backs tend to see a little bit of dip in production when they're in an offense with a mobile quarterback, a la Anthony Richardson. And what we've heard out of camps that Anthony Richardson isn't doing a whole lot well other than running the ball. That concerns me for Jonathan Taylor. That leads me to believe we're going to see a lot of designed runs for Anthony Richardson. He's going to become their goal line back. And it worries me that Jonathan Taylor isn't going to be able to live up to that first round ADP or even a second round ADP. I've been staying away from him. And I know there's concerns with Jahmyr Gibbs being in an offense with David Montgomery. I've seen some talk today in the community where we'll watch David Montgomery's going to just snipe a bunch of Jahmyr Gibbs work, and we're going to see his value tank. I have a hard time buying that. We saw Jahmyr Gibbs be incredibly productive last season with David Montgomery. I don't know what has changed that would ding his value right now versus Jonathan Taylor. He's got a full season of Anthony Richardson. I don't know that he's an RB1 this season. I know that's kind of a hot take and time will tell, but I'm having a hard time trusting him at ADP. So for me right now, it's Jahmyr Gibbs.
It's Gibbs for you, and I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, the other thing too is this might sound weird. I think I would prefer Gibbs over Taylor. And the other thing to say about Taylor too, I worry about Richardson actually dumping it off to him because it's just easier for him to tuck it and run. So that's going to hurt Taylor as well. This is going to be weird to say. I think I prefer Gibbs over Taylor, but I think I'd actually prefer David Montgomery over Gibbs given the draft capital. You know what I mean? Because like Gibbs, I just said 201 right now. Montgomery is going all the way down at the 609. So he's running back 20 right now. And I think I could get on board with that. Especially considering the draft capital, you gotta buy into Gibbs. That said, I think I drafted Gibbs twice this past weekend. Yeah. I got Montgomery nowhere. So do as I say, not as I do. Let's move on and talk about tight ends here, Nate. Travis Kelce, old Coyote, the guy who just seemingly never gets old. Travis Kelce, tight end 2 at the 205, or Trey McBride, tight end 3 at the 206, the young up-and-comer in Arizona who crushed it last year, but now has to contend with somebody named Marvin Harrison for targets this year. Who would you rather draft, Kelce or McBride?
So something I'd lean really heavily into when it comes to tight ends, and this comes in part from good friend Andrew Cooper, friend of the show, friend of the community. When you're looking at tight ends, look for that guy who's going to be the wide receiver 2 in their respective offenses, right? Well, that's definitely Trey McBride. Behind Marvin Harrison Jr., he is the wide receiver 2. And he's a great tight end too in any format that you're playing in. However, Travis Kelce is the wide receiver 1 in Kansas City. Yes, we love what we've seen out of Rashee Rice. He's not going to be suspended. Xavier Worthy is phenomenal, great rookie, speedy. But this is Travis Kelce's offense. This offense runs through Kelce and Mahomes. That's not changing this year. It's really hard for me to go away from Kelce when he's on the board and he's an option if I'm choosing between 2 tight ends.
So even though the age obviously plays into it, but the fact of how the Chiefs win and how they move the ball down the field, that trumps the age factor for Kelce over McBride.
Well, now if we're talking dynasty, I'm probably going to say McBride here.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
We're going long-term, 2, 3, 4 year outlooks.
Right.
But in redraft, I care less about age when it comes to a guy like Travis Kelce. This feels like me. It's like Antonio Gates, Tony Gonzalez, these guys who played into their late 30s and were still incredibly productive, not just from a fantasy standpoint, but from an NFL standpoint in their respective offenses. I feel like that's Travis Kelce. This guy's going to be tight end 1 to tight end 3 until the day he decides to retire. It's just the kind of competitor he is. If he's playing this season, I believe he's 100%. I don't care how old he is. I think he's got to be the tight end 1 right now. He will be my tight end 1, and I believe he will be the tight end 1 at the end of the season.
And I'm going to bring this up just because we won't have a time to bring him up later on. How does Sam Laporta factor into the first overall tight end conversation? This is a guy that had an incredible year last year. And for some reason, I just feel more comfortable drafting guys like Kelce, guys like McBride, even Dalton Kincaid to a certain point. And draft capital plays into that a little bit. But Laporta, I'm kind of off of this year. How do you feel about him?
I'm not off of him. Again, in redraft, I'm going to be Kelce ahead of everyone else. I think when it gets to McBride and Laporta, it's kind of a toss-up for me. The one thing that does concern me a little bit about Sam Laporta is Jameson Williams might be more of a factor in this offense. And if he is more of a factor in this offense, I think Laporta is the one who loses some targets. That said, I still think he's a top 5 tight end this year. Where you're drafting him, I think is fine. But I wouldn't take Kelce ahead of him in a redraft league.
In the FFPC main event, so we just did the old tight end versus young tight end. Let's do old receiver versus young receiver, and I'm using old in quotation marks because Davante Adams isn't old, but he is older. Now these guys right now, they're ADPs. Adams at the 303, Malik Neighbors, who continues to move up. He's all the way up to the 308 as the 15th receiver off the board. Who would you rather draft this year, Nate? Is it the grizzled vet in Adams, or is it the young buck in Malik Neighbors? Interesting pairing here.
This is a really interesting pairing, and it's a tougher decision than I would have thought it would be. Even when I was looking at this earlier, I thought, well, it's definitely going to be Malik Neighbors, right? But I'm not so sure now because I mean, it's the Giants. And I still have questions about the Giants. I still have questions about Daniel Jones. Is he going to make it through the season as the starter? But we know what Davante Adams can do. And I don't think the quarterback situation matters as much for a guy like Davante Adams versus a rookie like Malik Neighbors, where he's getting into the league. He's learning the pace of play. He's learning NFL-style defense. He's learning NFL-style offense. I'm going to take Davante Adams here. And that I might end up regretting it at the end of the season, but I think that his ceiling's higher. His realistic ceiling is higher than Malik Neighbors this year.
And I think that's an interesting point you bring up about the Giants offense too, because I've noticed this year, and it's weird. I've thought about this for months, and I'm first bringing it up on the show tonight. I've seen high stakes players this year more so, in my opinion, in years past, Nate, to put an emphasis on great offenses this year, where they're willing to take maybe not the number 1 or number 2 option in a bad offense versus the number 3 option in a good offense, right? And that's why I think it's interesting about Malik Neighbors. If this was a year where people were still drafting more so on the individual rather than the team, how high would Neighbors be going? How high would Davante Adams be going? Because the Raiders shouldn't put up a lot of points this year, but the emphasis has been on the Dolphins and the Chiefs and the Eagles and the Packers and the Lions, all these teams that are scoring points and putting up numbers. That's the emphasis I've seen this year. Kind of an interesting thing. I don't know if you've noticed the same thing.
I have, and I do understand it. I think that as managers, we're looking for any advantage we can get. And now you're looking at these offenses. You mentioned Miami. I think this is a great example because you've got Malik Washington, who's a rookie, and I think he's being overlooked. Now, he's a late round guy. He's going undrafted in a lot of formats, in a lot of leagues, on a lot of platforms. But he's exactly what Mike McDonald wants, right? He's that fast, speedy guy. He's like Tyreek Hill. He's like Jalen Waddle. If you don't think he's going to get involved in that offense in some fashion and by the end of the season be someone who is actually productive as a flex wide receiver 3, I understand it. Buying into the better offense because you're going to see more production. You're going to see these teams scoring more points. Teams like the Dolphins, teams like the 49ers, where look at all the money Brandon Aiyuk just got, right? Yeah. And we're all buying him at a very high ADP, and he's technically the wide receiver 2 in San Francisco. But the system is so good, you want a piece of that because it's an offense that's going to produce.
What's your take on the Aiyuk thing? Because this happened just before we went on air tonight. Your thoughts on Aiyuk? He was 410, I think. I mean, he's obviously going to go up in the FFPC main event now, but he was going 410. Are you getting the warm fuzzies from Aiyuk right now, or do you still okay, he did miss a lot of training camp. He's coming in colder than these other guys. How do you feel about Aiyuk now?
I don't care about him missing training camp. This is going to sound weird, but for me, what I'm really worried about is them getting Trent Williams signed.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you look at what Brock Purdy did without Trent Williams versus what he did with Trent Williams, it's night and day. His numbers it's 2 completely different worlds. If they don't get Trent Williams on the field, this dispute lasts into the season. How productive can this offense really be if Brock Purdy can't stay upright?
And Permar 99 pointing out everyone that got Aiyuk in the 4th and 5th profited. I say this all the time. This is why you want to draft throughout drafting season because there's always pockets of different values in ADP if you know where to look for it. Interesting you bring up Trent Williams because this is something I considered when I was on the clock at the 101 in a couple of drafts this past weekend. And I don't know if I just had McCaffrey blindness, but I took him both times. Knowing what we know about Trent Williams and knowing what we know about the Niners offense without him, at what point, Nate, would you take McCaffrey if he slid in a fantasy football draft that you were in? At what point do you say, okay, this is too good a value. I got to take him here.
102.
Oh, so not even that far.
Yeah, I know. Well, McCaffrey's one of those players, though. There are those players where you just don't care about the situation because they're a generational type talent. Christian McCaffrey is one of those guys. If they don't have Trent Williams and Brock Purdy's on his back all day long, they're just going to give the ball to McCaffrey more because they're looking to get out of Purdy's hands quicker, whether it's a handoff, a dump pass, screen pass, whatever. That actually, honestly, it probably benefits Christian McCaffrey in the long run if they don't have Trent Williams from a fantasy standpoint, not from a football standpoint, but.
I want to ask you, I want to go back to the well here with the James Cook well. We talked about it a little bit earlier in regards to a viewer asking about trading Chase Brown and George Pickens to upgrade to James Cook. Well, let's say you can draft James Cook right now, but you're passing up Josh Jacobs in the process. Who would you rather draft between those two guys this year? Cook in Buffalo or Josh Jacobs in Green Bay, as Troy Aikman would say?
That's tough. I don't love Josh Jacobs. We saw a pretty ugly downturn in his production last season. Now he's in an offense with a guy, Marshawn Lloyd, who I happen to like very, very much. But then, as we talked about earlier, James Cook, Ray Davis, I'm probably going to go Josh Jacobs here. I think there's probably more of a path to him getting some of that red zone work in Green Bay, and that means at least some touchdowns where James Cook just isn't going to get that work.
We talked about it too with Matt Shauf earlier, no AJ Dillon for the season, and people laugh, oh, Balky, you're crazy about Dillon. No, I never really liked him since his rookie year, but given what, what he did to his body in this offseason and given what the coaches were saying, I think Wayne Larrabee, who's the play-by-play guy, longtime play-by-play guy for the Packers, said this, and he's watching training camp. He said the last few years, AJ Dillon came into camp looking like a bodybuilder. He said this is the first year he came into camp looking like a football player. And I think that's that's the kind of thing that resonates, especially with Marshawn Lloyd hurt. We're going to talk about him coming up in the next segment. But I think Jacobs is going to get all he can handle, at least initially, unless they really want to work Emmanuel Wilson in. We're testing this theory about how the Packers handle their running backs. It's usually like, 2 series for the starter, a series for the backup. Are they going to keep doing that this year? I don't know. We'll find out Friday night in Brazil when they take on the Eagles. Zay Flowers and Terry McLaurin are up next on our list here, Nate. You have Zay Flowers, who I really like both these players this year.
Yeah,
I drafted
same.
a healthy amount of both. Flowers I love as the number 1 in Baltimore. McLaurin I love as the number 1 in Washington. This is like trying to pick which one of my kids I like best. Probably my daughter, for what it's worth. But no, Flowers or McLaurin here. Who would you rather take in a draft?
Oh, I love Zay Flowers. Love Zay Flowers. Had a lot of hope for Zay Flowers coming into Baltimore with the offensive coordinator change, going to the Monken offense, getting away from Roman, running the ball all the time. But then they brought in Derrick Henry, Eric. And I think what we've seen out of Monken is he's a really smart coordinator, and he knows this team is built to run the ball. You're not going to change that overnight. They brought in Derrick Henry. This is a team that's going to continue to run the ball at a pretty heavy rate. I think that caps Zay Flowers, unfortunately, for me. Terry McLaurin, on the other hand, this offense is going to be, I think it's going to be kind of crazy. I have some words I can't say on a family show here that come to mind when I think what this Washington offense could be with Jaden Daniels. And I think for Terry McLaurin, it's going to be fun. And I'm all in on Terry McLaurin in this Commanders offense right now.
I can't really disagree with you, because if you would have said Flowers, I would have said you're right. You'd say McLaurin. I say you're right. I can't wrap my head around it. I think the best advice I can tell people who are watching, draft a bunch of teams in the FFPC so you can have a lot of shares of both these guys. That's it.
Yeah.
Permar says here in the YouTube chat, McLaurin easily is his pick here. Flowers running around getting screens. What's that route tree look like this year? Waiting. We'll find out what happens with Flowers this year if that's what happens. And bear in mind, like you just said, the whole Derrick Henry aspect. This could be like the black and blue Ravens of the Jamal Lewis, days too. There's a non-zero chance of that as well. Let's go back to a couple of things that we were just talking about. Number one, drafting players that are on elite offenses versus semi-elite players who are the lead guy on their offense. And we'll revisit the Lions here. David Montgomery or Ramondre Stevenson here, Nate. Ramondre Stevenson, I think, is almost inarguably the player that Patriots offense has to run through at this point, given the quarterback, given the running back situation, given the tight ends. However, Montgomery, although the backup, quote unquote backup in Detroit, I guess I shouldn't say backup. I'll say he's the second running back drafted by FFPC players. This is an interesting guy who should put up numbers here as well. Right now, both these players are going in drafts. Montgomery is running back 20, Stevenson running back 21 in the FFPC main event at the end of the 6th, early 7th round. Who would you rather draft between Stevenson and Montgomery, my friend?
This is tough too, because as much as I love David Montgomery, and we know that he's going to be a big part of this offense, even though he is the quote unquote, as you said, backup, I'm going to have to go Ramondre Stevenson here. Like you said, this New England offense, we don't know what it's going to be. We know it's going to be Jacoby Brissett to start. We don't know past week one who's going to be the starter in this offense. We don't know what anything about this offense is going to be, except one thing. We know that Ramondre Stevenson is going to carry the rock. We know he's efficient. We know he can catch the ball. I think he just has a higher ceiling than Montgomery. He's not really sharing any time in that backfield with anyone. Yeah. It's kind of the Ramondre show. So I'm going to go with the guy who's not in a quote unquote committee here. I'm going to say Ramondre Stevenson is my pick between these two.
I think I'd probably go Montgomery, but ask me again tomorrow. I might change my mind and say Stevenson because volume is king at running back for sure. Well, it's king at every position, but it's definitely king at running back. So you could definitely make a strong case for Stevenson here. I do have a significant feeling on this next one between Brock Bowers and David Njoku. I'm not going to share it because I want to hear what you have to say first. But right now, Njoku's tight end 10, Bowers is tight end 11 in the mid-6th round of FFPC tight end premium drafts. So you have a guy that was a former highly rated draft pick, a guy with a lot of draft pedigree, to this year's guy who might be joining the elite tight end tier next year with Kincaid and Laporta and Kelsey and Andrews and all those guys, McBride. You look at what Bowers versus Njoku is this year in redraft, which one would you rather have?
I probably a month ago, I probably would have said David Njoku, but now seeing Deshaun Watson do his thing in camp again, and then hearing that they're going to move Jameis Winston and keep Dorian Thompson-Robinson as their backup. Apparently they were happy with him in camp. It makes it really hard for me to want any single part of this Browns offense at any point this season. While I think Brock Bowers is kind of capped in that Vegas offense, I'm still going to go Bowers here. I think he significantly outscores Njoku.
By the way, pour one out for Jameis Winston. Not only because I'm a Florida State guy, but because I saw what Joe Flacco did last year when Watson went down, and he made, and not that he made him, but he made Cooper a superstar. He made Njoku super. Like all these guys were just crushing it with Flacco having this YOLO attitude, throwing the ball down the field. Cut to Jameis Winston's like, I invented that style of play at quarterback in the NFL. Well, I was like, okay, this year, if it doesn't happen for Watson and he's shaky or he gets hurt again, dude, Winston's still going to keep this going. That said, I do happen to agree with you. I think it's Bowers here. I have heard from so many high stakes players telling me that they love Bowers this year because they will never get him this inexpensively in an FFPC draft ever again after this year. This is the year that he's going to make himself known. You're going to see why he's not a bust. You're going to see why he's a stud tight end and why the Raiders invested in him. And I happen to agree with most of that, especially if you're playing in a national competition and you can get a guy with this type of upside as your tight end 11 and in the end of the 6th round in the Fantasy Pros Championship, the FFPC main event, the SuperFlex Best Ball Tournament. I mean, this is what you need to do here. This is how you win $1 million or $100,000 grant. Like this is, it just makes perfect sense. Totally lock in step with you on Bowers here. Shifting back to the quarterbacks here. A couple of guys I drafted a decent amount this past weekend, Kyler Murray and Anthony Richardson, two guys that can definitely move the ball with their legs as well as they can, maybe even better than with their arms. Quarterback 6 for Richardson, Murray's quarterback 7. They're going at the end of the 7th round, mid to late 7th round in the FFPC main event right now. Who would you rather draft between those two, Nate?
I'm going to have to go Kyler Murray. Got to go with the vet. He's got a better offense around him, in my opinion. I mean, James Conner, we've got Trey Benson, who we'll see if he turns into a thing. Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr. I like the pieces around Murray. Again, he's a veteran. Jonathan Gannon got a lot of crap last season before the season started for his lackluster speeches. But overall, I think he's a pretty good coach. I think this is an Arizona team that's going to be markedly better than we're expecting this season. It doesn't mean I think they're going to make the playoffs, but like this might be a 500 team this year or a little bit better. And I think Kyler Murray is going to be a top 5 QB.
Yeah, I love both these guys this year. I lean towards Murray, if for no other reason than I think he has the more explosive weapons.
Yeah.
With McBride and Harrison, even Trey Benson, Michael Wilson, James Conner to a certain extent too. Like, there's not a whole lot of players that get me super excited on Indianapolis. You know, Josh Downs, who's out. You have Alec Pierce, who to me is sort of just a big play best ball type guy. Pittman's great. And Pittman's going to do numbers this year, but I also don't think he's the most explosive I don't think he has the lid lifting capability to his game, or at least Indianapolis hasn't found a way to exploit that yet. So I think it's Murray here, although it's very, very close. Keeping with our theme of putting a young guy versus an older guy, let's do Keon Coleman and DeAndre Hopkins here. This is a rookie coming out of Florida State by way of the Michigan State Spartans, being drafted as wide receiver 45 at the 901. Hopkins is right behind him at the wide receiver 46 at the 903, but Hopkins would probably be higher if he didn't get hurt in preseason. The latest we've heard on him is that he should be good to go for week 1, which is great. But if you're drafting before week 1, which most of us are, who do you draft? Is it Coleman or is it Hopkins?
It's got to be Keon Coleman, just from an offense standpoint. Better situation for Coleman. He kind of has a path to be the wide receiver 1 in Buffalo if he plays out the first 3-4 weeks. If he can get some rapport with Josh Allen. DeAndre Hopkins is getting up there in age. He's in an offense that I don't think is going to be very good this year, Eric. I can't see a lot coming out of Tennessee. Will Levis, there are too many question marks with him at quarterback. Can he even get the ball to DeAndre Hopkins is the question. Is he going to favor guys like Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd? We just don't know. Too many question marks around DeAndre Hopkins. I'm going Keon Coleman.
You're going Keon Coleman here, and I lean towards that as well. I know there's a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but there's numerous high-stakes players who know way more than me, who I really respect. I've been seeing them take Keon Coleman in a lot of drafts too. I will not reveal their names, but just know that they're significant players, and that's why I lean Coleman here. I always, take that away for a second. It's a young man's game. I mean, the NFL is a young man's game, and I almost always, not always, but almost always, I will default to the younger player. Receiver, it's a little bit different, but Coleman, and the other thing too is he's the mystery box. He's the guy behind door number 2 that we just don't know what he's capable of, where we kind of know what Hopkins is. And we know he's also playing with Ridley this year, and it may not be the number 1 there. And Coleman may not be the number 1 too. Fascinating stories to watch both.
It's a lot, yes.
Back to the tight ends here. Pat Freiermuth in Pittsburgh, TJ Hawkinson in Minnesota. Steady Eddie Pat Freiermuth, who's not hurt right now, in Pittsburgh, or TJ Hawkinson, who once again will resume his role in that top elite tier of tight ends for 2025. We just don't know when he's going to be healthy this year, but the upside is there, Nate. Who would you rather draft, Freiermuth or Hawkinson?
I'm going Freiermuth here. Plain and simple, we don't know how healthy Hawkinson's going to be when he comes back. Is he going to be 100% this year? I'm not fully convinced. That's a brutal knee injury, and he's an older tight end. Muth, on the other hand, he's in an Arthur Smith offense. At the very least, he's going to see consistent volume. You can look for him to pepper in some tight end 1 finishes here and there. But if these are the 2 guys that you're looking to pick between, you're probably better off streaming tight ends, guys.
Yeah. That's the thing. It's like, and Hawkinson, yeah, I understand the upside, but the roster clogging is what irritates me, for half the season, maybe more. I just don't know when he's going to come back. And then, you could be waiting like, oh, I just need Hawkinson back. And then by the time you get him back, you're, 3-5, right, or you're 2-6, or you're, 3-9 or something, you know what I mean? And then you're out of it, and you spent this whole season waiting on Hawkinson to a point where you can't even use him. And maybe you missed out on those, waiver wire wonders of week 1 or week 2 where you could have got them and they'd be paying dividends. So great segment of Would You Rather Draft. I really appreciate it, Nate. Let's do this. When we come back, I'm going to tell you about the FFPC SuperFlex Best Ball Tournament. I also want to find out where Nate stands on certain players like Marshawn Lloyd, like Puka Nacua, like Jalen Waddle, that and much more. He's Nate Polvogt from Optimus Fantasy Football. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back right after this.
Football. This month, more men and women will go draft than ever before in our country's history. With prize pools at record highs, multiple fantasy players will become millionaires this year playing the game they love. This month, thousands of drafters will compete in redraft, best ball and dynasty leagues, and with innovative formats, they can look forward to a host of high-stakes competition. It's August again in fantasy football, and under the FFPC, high-stakes fantasy is bigger and better than ever before. Why would you ever settle for less?
Flair once said, if you want to be the man, you got to beat the man. And if you want to be the man or woman this fantasy football season, you got to play over at myffpc.com. That's where all the best fantasy gamers play. That's where all the high-stakes gamers play, because they've got the high-stakes leagues. They have the best formats. They have the best payouts. It's the place to be. And if you win a FFPC main event or a Fantasy Pros Championship contest over there, you put some serious respect on your name and some money in your pocket. Anyone can win their hometown league, right? You're probably a great fantasy gamer. Prove it. You go out and win an event like this, you can go and put in your Twitter bio or X bio, FFPC main event champion. That means something. That's definitive proof that you're one of the best fantasy gamers in the world. So go over to myffpc.com and use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more. And now you're on your road to greatness, right? You could even do an online draft, or you can go and draft in Las Vegas with the stars. Draft at Planet Hollywood for the FFPC main event. That's where they're all doing it. It's awesome stuff. So get set up now so that you can be a star this year. You can be the man. Just like Ric Flair, you can be a champion. Woo!
The FFPC main event is going strong. We introduced, I believe it was today for the first time, 1 hour slow draft. So if you cannot set aside an hour and a half to do an FFPC main event live, we still have 1 hour slow drafts. Those are going on right now at myffpc.com, or just scan the QR code right in front of you. We do have 6 spots left in the 11:30 p.m. Eastern time draft tonight. So that league's already half full. That's looking good to fill. So if you want to take your shot at $1 million, hit that QR code, register now, myffpc.com, and it's going to be a huge weekend of drafting too. So if you have not gotten your main event teams yet, don't forget there is a multiple team discount too. You can still draft live at Planet Hollywood if you're going to travel out there with us. We have 6, 8, 9 spots left in all of our FFPC main event live events at Planet Hollywood. So if you're joining us out there, or maybe you live in Vegas, check it out, myffpc.com. Let's find out where Optimus Fantasy Football's Nate Polvogt stands on various players around the NFL who may or may not be in the news. But I do want to try to not stump you, but I want to find out where you stand on these guys, because they could end up deciding fantasy championships this year. And we'll lead off with Marshawn Lloyd. Marshawn Lloyd, the running back for the Green Bay Packers, expected to be the backup to Aaron Jones this year. And had he not had 2 separate injuries in training camp, he might just be that. He might be just that. However, looks like it's Emmanuel Wilson as the backup right now. But how do you handle Marshawn Lloyd for drafts? Are you going to draft him like he's the number 3 running back? Are you going to draft him based on that he's going to be the number 2 sooner rather than later? Running back 54 at the 1306 in the FFPC main event. Nate, where do you stand on Marshawn Lloyd?
You know, given his ADP right now, he's a guy I'm okay drafting and stashing and holding and waiting to see the first 2, 3, 4 weeks. You know, let's see how he does. Is he making progress? Is he coming back? Is he getting involved in the offense once he is out on the field, once he's on the sideline, once he's in pads, like kind of what's happening with him? Because once he is healthy, I expect him to get a significant chunk of work in this offense. I might be a little biased. I got to see him work in person in Mobile in the Senior Bowl back in January. The guy's talented, and he's a student of the game, which is something you love to see with these young guys. When they listen to their coaches, they make adjustments, and they learn and get better through the process. And over 3 days, we watched him get better and better and better on the goal line, which were questions at USC, as a receiver, which they just really simply didn't use him as at USC. He showed he could do all those things. he was a later round pick for Green Bay, but I think he's a guy who over the next 2 to 3 seasons, he's probably their starting back. I think by week 8 to week 10, he's a guy who's getting significant volume, and he can help you with your playoff push in any league you're in.
Yeah, I'm taking some flack in the chat right now. Jimmy Williams, my buddy who's a Bears fan, is like, yes, let's talk about Packers, Balky, and Permar99 pointing out that I don't bash those guys. I will say this, and it's not where do you stand on Packers receivers, but I'll transform it into this. I don't think I drafted one Packers receiver out of 9 drafts. I don't think I drafted any of them this past weekend at the KFFSC, Nate. And it's because I like those Packers receivers for best ball, but trying to figure out which one to start on a weekly basis, not only with, Wicks and Reed and Watson and Dobbs, but with Musgrave in there and with Jacobs too. Wow. Man, that I think that's a fool's errand. I just didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah, I have zero exposure to that receiving core right now, Eric, for that very reason, because you don't know who's going to be the guy every week. It could be Christian Watson one week, then it could be Dobbs the next week. It could be Jaden Reed 3 weeks in a row. We just don't know. And Musgrave, you throw Luke Musgrave in there too. We don't know what kind of work he's going to get. Mm-hmm. What we do know is that Jordan Love is someone you want to be drafting. I would be staying away from this receiving core, though, unless it's best ball.
Adam Schefter reported 2 days ago that Jonathan Brooks will remain on the NFI PUP list, which means he's going to be out at least the first 4 weeks of the season. David Newton, who covers the Carolina Panthers for ESPN.com, says that they are bringing him along slowly, and they feel good about Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders, but they do believe, obviously, as they made him the 46th pick of the NFL draft, that he is the future. It was November for Jonathan Brooks when he tore his ACL. I would think that at some point he is going to come back this year, and he's going to come back and be the starter. How effective he's going to be, just a little over a year, maybe a little less than a year after he tears his ACL. That's where I have questions. Jonathan Brooks right now, if you want to draft him in the FFPC main event, is coming in as an ADP of running back 31 at the 8-11. Nate, where do you stand on Jonathan Brooks?
I have stayed away from him in drafts. The knee concerns me. Like you said, in November, it'll be a year since he's off that injury. Now that he's on the PUP list, it leads me to believe that when they do bring him back, it's going to be a very slow work into this offense. I don't think we're going to see him have enough volume to be fantasy relevant. Probably not until maybe playoff time, fantasy playoff time. And by then, if you rostered him at that ADP, you might be kind of screwed anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm staying away from him. I think he's a great asset. I think this is a team that hopefully is smart enough to bring him along slowly. If they think he's going to be their franchise running back in the future, I'm all in on him in Dynasty. But when it comes to redraft, it's too risky for me.
What do you think? What do you make of what Permar99 just said in the YouTube chat? Chuba Hubbard might have value all season, no matter what. Like even if Brooks is healthy, I think he's an interesting pick. Nobody talks about him. Nobody takes him because they're excited about Brooks. But that's kind of a Sharky pick there.
I like it. I have been an advocate of taking Chuba at his current ADP. I don't see a reason why he can't be fantasy relevant for the entire season, even when Brooks does come back. How many offenses really run a one-back system at this point, Eric? Almost none, right? So you can't just pick one back who's going to be the guy in an offense. Chuba Hubbard's a very good receiving back. I think we're going to see a lot of that get worked into the offense once Jonathan Brooks comes back. But before that, he's going to be the guy. Miles Sanders is Miles Sanders. You can forget about him. But yeah, I think Chuba Hubbard's a sneaky late pick who could have value all year long.
I want to ask you about CeeDee Lamb, who has now signed with the Dallas Cowboys. He is going to be in camp, and he's been in camp and catching passes, and it seems to think he has no problems. Coming in this late in camp. Do you think he's going to have any problems? How high would you take him? Where do you stand on CeeDee Lamb?
CeeDee Lamb is my wide receiver 1. So that's where I stand on him. I have no problem with him being the first player off of the board. PPR, non-super flex drafts. He should be the first receiver off the board in every format.
Lamb, it's an easy one to do at this point. for sure. We talked about Jaylen Warren a little bit before. Is that kind of how? I told you I stand. I know Permar99 pointed out he thinks it's going to be a three-headed monster with Cordarrelle Patterson, who by the way did score in the third preseason game. I am still of the opinion that I think even if it's three people, Jaylen Warren in that backfield with having the elite pass catching skills as he does, and the guy that was the more electric between the two, between him and Harris last year. If they do run a ton, which Arthur Smith's offense tend to do, that's a pretty big running back fantasy pie, for lack of a better term. So I'm still fine with Jaylen Warren. I'll just bring up the ADPs here for you before you tell me where you stand on Jaylen Warren. But right now, Jaylen Warren is running back 29 at the 808. Najee Harris is running back 25 at the 707. So a little bit of separation there, probably because of the injury that Harris is now growing a full round ahead of Warren. But Warren specifically, where do you stand on him, Nate?
I love Jaylen Warren. I have been taking him at ADP all over the place. There's a world in which he could end up being the RB1 in this offense. It's Arthur Smith. So I'm buying both of these guys right now. I think both of them could have very productive seasons at their ADP. Jaylen Warren, I think I'm of the opinion he's a better running back than Najee Harris. I like him at the position just a little bit more. I think he's got a little bit more talent. I think he's more versatile than Najee is. And if I'm going to pick between the two, it's Jaylen Warren all day at that ADP.
Jaylen Warren is your pick there between those two Steelers running backs, and I agree. Speaking of running backs that have just come back, Puka Nacua apparently is ready to roll for week 1 against the Detroit Lions, a guy who has missed most of August, some of July, with that injury that he suffered in training camp. When you look at the ADP for Nacua, he has went from like 109, 110, now down to the 203. Where do you stand on Nacua at that ADP, Nate?
I like the later ADP. I was a little worried about the slightly earlier ADP. It just felt a little too costly for a guy who, I mean, let's be honest, man. He had a historic season for a rookie who came out of nowhere. Expecting him to repeat that, I mean, that's tough. Could he do it? Absolutely. I wouldn't bet on it. Taking him 203, 204, 205, somewhere in that range feels like a pretty solid, realistic ADP to me, where you're getting a return on value. So I am okay with that. If he sneaks back up into the first round, I'm probably out.
The injury thing, like, does that play? How big of a factor is that in Nacua?
I'm not worried about it.
Not worried. Okay.
I don't really. I tend to not worry about this preseason stuff because most of the time it doesn't linger into the season. Like, you hear about these injuries and they're cautious about it. They work with the trainers. They get these guys ready. But once the season starts, it's a whole new world, right? They're going to be on the field unless they're pretty much disabled. I'm not worried about them at all.
Speaking of preseason injuries, and this is something that didn't happen in the preseason, but it has lingered into the preseason, Nick Chubb. Chubb is a guy who's been a workhorse over the course of his career. And obviously we all saw that gruesome injury that he suffered, I believe, week 2 last year. I've heard varying reports about it. It's not as bad as it was. He's going to be okay. There's no timetable for his return. He's going to start the season on PUP now. Running back 39 at the 1006. I kind of washed my hands of Nick Chubb. I don't really want to deal with this. I don't know if number one, I don't know if he's coming back this season. Number 2, I don't know if he does, if he's going to be a guy that's going to get the snaps in, with Jerome Ford and Deontay Foreman there. And number 3, if he's not worked in slowly and he gets a lot of work, I don't know how effective he's going to be. I know where I stand on Nick Chubb, and it's kind of letting anybody else take him. Where do you stand on him going at the 1006?
Same. It was a fun ride while it lasted, right? Like, there's so many of us who rode that Nick Chubb train for a couple seasons to a championship or close. He's not that guy anymore. He's getting up there in age. The injuries have stacked up. His body's beat up. They've got Jerome Ford. And like you said, they've got Deontay Foreman this season. They're not really going to need to lean on him. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't even see him. But even if we do, I'm hands off of the guy. Unless he pops at some point during the season and starts playing really, really well towards the end, and I can acquire him in a trade or on waivers, but I'm not drafting him. It's too risky.
No, I mean, like, I'm actually debating, like, do I need to stash him on IR in one of my dynasty leagues? You know what I mean? Like, can I just let him go? And eventually he's probably going to come back, but I just think it's going to be a shell of his former self. I think we've seen the last of fantasy relevant Nick Chubb. Now, I hope I'm wrong. And if anybody is going to prove me wrong, it'd be a player of the ilk and having the work ethic of Nick Chubb. I have real difficulty trying to say he's going to be fantasy relevant. Another guy who missed a lot of time last year, except for 4 snaps of the season, was Aaron Rodgers. Nate, I don't know if it's my Packers fandom. I feel like he's being underdrafted this year. I really feel like he should be going higher than what he is. Right now in the FFPC main event, you can get Aaron Rodgers, Aaron blanking Rodgers, 4-time MVP, first ballot Hall of Famer, quarterback 20, middle of the 16th round. This is behind guys like Justin Herbert, the injured Kirk Cousins, or the formerly injured Kirk Cousins, Tua Tagovailoa, Trevor Lawrence. I guess you can make a case for Rodgers not to go ahead of those guys, but 16th round, really? We're letting this guy go. I happen to like Tyler Conklin quite a bit this year. I happen to like Garrett Wilson quite a bit this year. I think Breece Hall is really going to stabilize that ground game. I know they improved the offensive line. I think this is too low for Aaron Rodgers. And I think, I don't know if I draft him as my starter, but I'm definitely drafting him as my backup.
Well, look, dude, this guy isn't that far off of 2 MVPs, right?
Right.
Don't forget that. And yes, tore his Achilles last season. But what we've seen out of some of these quarterbacks who get into their late 30s, we saw it with Peyton Manning, we saw it with Tom Brady, we saw it with Drew Brees. These guys almost get better. Not because they're physically any better. Their skill sets are declining, but they're smarter, right? Mm-hmm. So they see the field differently. They play differently. And that's where Aaron Rodgers is. His skill set's declining. He still has a cannon for an arm. He will, mark my words, will finish as a top 12 QB this season.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, I like that call quite a bit. It's bold, but it makes sense. You know, it's bold because he's drafted as quarterback 20, but I could easily see him finishing in the top.
Well, and that's the thing. You look at what he's got in this offense, right? Garrett Wilson, wide receiver 1. Breece Hall, RB1. Tyler Conklin is incredibly talented. He's got a great offensive line and one of the best defenses in football.
I just noticed you have a free Aiyuk chalkboard behind you. Now you have to change that, Nate. What's it going to say next? This is good content.
Oof,
yeah, you have to change it to something newsy and something fantasy relevant.
Oh, I will. It'll probably
free
be
Chase, free Jamar Chase.
It could be free Jamar Chase. It might be something Bo Nix related. I don't know. If you want to know, you've got to tune in to our mailbag show tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern.
And then we will find out.
And I will reveal my chalkboard.
We can't wait for that. Speaking of Bo Nix, you're in Denver, right?
Yeah.
What's the scuttlebutt? Well, I mean, I know how people feel about him. I know Broncos fans feel about him. Is this for real? You think he's going to be a pretty good starter in the NFL?
I have a hard time.
Let's rein it in a little bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about redraft this year with Bo Nix and the Broncos offense. How relevant is he going to keep these skill position guys there?
I think he'll keep them fairly relevant. I mean, but what's relevant in this Broncos offense? Are we talking about Cortland Sutton? I mean, he's probably a wide receiver 3.
Yeah.
But that's where he's being drafted, right? I think he keeps Javonte Williams really relevant. I think Javonte Williams is in for a year where he far exceeds his ADP where he's going right now. I think he's an RB1 tier player this season in Denver. Sorry
to interrupt. I just want to point out Mile High Luke is in Lakewood. I don't know the Denver suburbs at all. Is that close?
I'm in Arvada, so not that far.
All right. I have no idea, but I'm glad.
Same county. He's just way south of me. So
got it. Okay. All right. Keep going. I'm sorry.
All right. Yeah. This is going to be interesting because we're hearing comparisons to a younger Drew Brees, which I think is BS. I saw the guy in Mobile. I watched him play in college. He's good. I have concerns about his decision-making. And yeah, he looked great in the preseason. The problem is he was facing mostly like second team and third team defenses with a first team offense. I want to see what he does week 1, week 2, week 3. I want to see him get better. I'm not buying into him in any formats. I've got a little bit of him in Dynasty, but I'm stashing him on taxi squads in those formats. He's not a guy that I'm looking to play this year. You can be excited about him. Denver media is excited about him. From a fantasy standpoint, though, he's not worth taking a risk on this season.
Going back to kind of the theme of the second hour of the show, drafting players who are not the number one option on their team Jalen Waddle is a guy that I drafted several times this past weekend. I feel really good about it. I think he's in for a big year. One of the rare things about Jalen Waddle is, yeah, he's wide receiver 17. Yeah, he's going at the 309. Yeah, he's got Tyreek Hill, but he's got Tyreek Hill, who has that bad thumb and is coming up on, at the point where you would think soft tissue injuries and speed might be more of an issue than they were for him in the past. I'm not projecting the downfall of Tyreek Hill. I think he's going to be great this season. However, if you were to miss time, man, I love Jalen Waddle, and that could be a big-time pick to win if Hill misses any time. How do you feel about Waddle? Where do you stand on him this year, Nate?
I love Jalen Waddle. I love the talent. Wide receiver 34 last year, but he missed 3 games. I think that he slots in as a top 20 wide receiver, and I want Tyreek Hill on the field with him. Plain and simple, he forces defenses to pay more attention to him. That opens up Jalen Waddle in the passing game. Regardless, I really like Waddle as an ADP. I've been drafting a lot of Jalen Waddle. I have a lot of exposure to Jalen Waddle, and I'm very happy about that exposure to Jalen.
Yeah, no, I would be too. I'm thrilled with it this year. In as far as the type of season he's going to have, I think it's going to be huge. The latest we heard on Joe Mixon from Jonathan Alexander, who covers the team, was about a week ago for the Houston Chronicle. Jonathan Alexander works. He said he, quote, looks close to being back to full health, which is great. Has not played in the preseason. I don't know if he's going to play against the Colts. And the Texans have called him, Texans coaches have called him a workhorse back this year. Dameon Pierce is there. Cam Akers there. I should ask you where you stand on who the backup is between Akers and Pierce there behind Mixon. But where do you stand on Mixon first and foremost?
I'm all in on Mixon. He's going late enough where I feel good about the value. And I think he was always going to be the workhorse in this offense. So look at their backfield last season, Eric. Devin Singletary and Dameon Pierce. Joe Mixon is an upgrade to both of those guys. I think we see Dameon Pierce get mixed in as a change of pace guy, but for the most part, Mixon's a 3-down back in this offense, and I want that value. I want that volume.
Over to the YouTube chat, Mr. Bakes a lot. Can Rome Odunze have a Tank Dell season with Caleb Williams? The answer to that is yes, he can. But I would follow that up as, will he have a Tank Dell season with Caleb Williams?
Probably not.
That'd be my guess. That'd be how I'd answer that as well. Speaking of Caleb Williams, where do you stand on him this year, Nate?
I'm a little trepidatious. There's been a lot of hype behind the guy, and I think long-term he's going to be great. But like with any rookie player, they have a lot to learn coming into this league. The college game is completely different than the NFL game. The players are faster. You're talking about the best of the best at every single position that you're playing against. Chicago has a lot of work to do. They didn't just completely fix this offense by signing DeAndre Swift, getting Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. Their line is still mediocre at best. Their defense still is not great. I think that's going to cause some issues for Williams. That said, I still think he's probably a middle of the road QB2, somewhere in that like QB 17, 18 range this season. I can't see him breaking into the QB1 territory in redraft though.
Final question, also a Chicago Bear question. What about Keenan Allen? A guy who apparently put on 20 plus pounds this offseason. Should we be concerned about the weight gain? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Where do you stand on Keenan Allen this year?
Well, I put on about 20 pounds this offseason as well.
You are not an NFL receiver, Nate. You are not an NFL receiver. I will tell you, though,
I could be if I wanted to be. I'm not worried about it. If you thought that Keenan Allen was going to continue to be a wide receiver 1 this season, like he has been, or close to a wide receiver 1, like he was with the Chargers, you were kidding yourself. The guy's getting up there in age. He's going into an offense with Rome Odunze and DJ Moore. These are 2 much younger guys who are going to garner most of the volume from Caleb Williams. I'm not drafting Keenan Allen right now. It just doesn't make sense to me. I don't know that he's going to see more than 3 to 4 targets a game in this offense.
Interesting. Very interesting. And we'll leave on that ominous Keenan Allen note tonight as we put a pin in the conversation on the Better Sports Network's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Nate, tell the viewers once again about Optimus Fantasy Football.
We are a full service company, Eric. We have our full website. We are going to have an article coming out every day during the season. Really excited about our writers. We've got Casey Kasem, Kevin Tompkins. We've got Hoove. We've got Bo McBrayer and myself, all going to be putting out written content. We've got shows all week long on our YouTube channel as well. And then as the season goes, we're going to be debuting some fun tools. some rankings tools, some data sorting tools, some start, sit, and waiver tools, and we're going to have some dynasty stuff coming as well. So check us out, optimusfantasy.com. Follow me on Twitter, and then follow us on Twitter at Optimus Fantasy.
And Nate is on Twitter at Nate Polvogt. That's NatePolvogt. Nate, certainly appreciate you coming aboard tonight. We'll do this again real soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I want to thank Nate Polvogt, Matt Shauf, our producer, Matt Deutsch. Don't forget, next Thursday, we are back live, 7 p.m. Establish the Runs. Jack Miller will be my guest co-host then. Fantasy Pros Championship, FFPC main event, and the FFPC Superflex Best Ball Tournament, all going on at myffpc.com. And don't forget to register for the Fantasy Pros Championship Draftathon, benefiting Casey to the Rescue, the dog rescue service that our very own FFPC's Chris Lambert works for, volunteers her time, driving from northern New York, or upstate New York, I should say, down to Kentucky numerous times every year. She saved over 1,000 dogs last year from euthanasia, sometimes hours before they were scheduled to be euthanized. If you want to help contribute, each draft that we fill with the Fantasy Pros Draftathon this weekend, we'll contribute $50 to that, and hopefully we can save a lot more dogs in 2024. For Nate Polvogt and Matt Deutsch, I'm Eric Balkman. This has been the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show presented by the FFPC on the Better Sports Network. See you again next week at 7 o'clock.